Welcome to everyone. This week video will cover the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the gold, and the Bitcoins. This update will be for the week of November 6, 2023. Before we start, make sure you read carefully the disclaimer. If you like this video, don't forget to click on the like button, subscribe and click on the bell, to make sure you don't miss any future videos. Let's start with the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The 10 days cycle. The last 10 days cycle low was last week, on October 27 at 32,327.30. The next low is expected on November 4. The success rate for the 10 days cycle is 100%. On November 1, the market crossed above his cycle line at 33,034.18 for a potential target at 33,741.06. With a high on November 2 at 33,839.09, the market met his target. The 20 days cycle. On the last week update, the next 20 days cycle was expected November 9. Apparently, on the Dow Jones, the cycles run little bit shorter than usually. In this case, we should be placed the 20 days cycle low on October 27. Then, the next low for this cycle is expected on November 14, instead of November 9. On November 1, the market crossed above his cycle line at 33,209.61 for a potential target at 34,091.92. Today's high meet the target. Here the cycle line for next week and the potential target if the market crossed below his cycle line. The success rate for this cycle is 90%. The 40 days cycle. This week rally found resistance on his cycle line and slightly cross above, but we need confirmation next week if the market stay above his cycle lines. The previous downside target at 31,952 still valid until we have the confirmation of the market cross above his both cycle lines. If the market cross above his cycle lines next week, then the downside targets will be invalid, and we will have a new upside targets. For more details about the target's price's validity, I recommend to watch my series of video on Introduction to Cycles. I posted the link below. The success rate for the 40 days is 90.91%. Here the cycle lines resistance and their potential targets if the market cross above his cycle lines. For the same reason explained above on the 20 days cycle. The next 40 days cycle should form a low on November 30. The 80 days cycle. The October 27 is the 80 days low. This cycle low formed 13 days early than expected. The low was expected on November 9. Today, the market crossed above his cycle line at 33,694.70 and 33,644.39. For a potential target at 35,062 and 34,961. The next low is expected around end of December, beginning of January 2024. The success rate for the 80 days cycle is 100%. What's next for this cycle? Since there is lots of bearishness in the market, I personally don't believe the market will meet his target. This 80 days cycle should be more bearish than the previous one and should make a new low. The 20-week cycle. On this cycle we still have some uncertainty to where to place the last 20-week low. If placing the last 80 days on October 27 is correct, then the best time frame for this cycle to form is beginning of January 2024. The success rate for the 20 weeks is 75%. We can expect the market find resistance on his cycle line before resuming his decline. The 40-week cycle. The 31,320 target still valid for now. If the market cross above his cycle line next week, this will provide an upside potential target. Here the resistance line for this week and the potential upside target if the market cross above the line. And this will invalid the previous target. Otherwise 31,320 should be an important support. The 18-month cycle. Last month the Dow Jones crossed below his cycle line. at 33,500, providing a potential target at 31,320. This target is expected to be reached by the first quarter of 2024. Now let's see the gold market. Last week I mentioned the next 10 days cycle low is scheduled for October 31st. The low occurred on November 1st, just one day after the expected date. The gold market made a low at 182.67. The next low is scheduled on November 10th. Here are the support lines and their potential target if the market crossed below them. The success rate for the 10-day cycle is 83.33%. The 20-day cycle. The October 20th high at 185.23 was the 20 days cycle peak. The low of this cycle formed on October 24th. The next 20-day cycle low is expected between November 8th and 9th. At that time, technically, the market should cross below his cycle line and provide a downside target. Here are the support lines and the potential targets. The success rate for this cycle is 91.67%. The 40-day cycle. On October 27th, the 40-day cycle formed a peak at 186.36. Last week I expected the peak forming during the end of October or the first 2 days of November. The peak formed right in the time target. This peak has formed on the right side of the cycle, the red dashed line. When the peak occurs on the right side of the cycle, we call that right time translation. Meaning the following correction should be mild. For more details on time translation, I posted below the link for my series of video on Introduction to Cycles. The next low is scheduled for November 10th. There is a high probability the market should find support on his cycle lines, then rebound. The success rate for this cycle is 100%. When the 40 days cycle low is formed, I will draw a trend line from the October low to the 40 days low. When the market will cross below this trend line, this will give an important information about the 80 days peak formation. This will mean the 80 days cycle peak is formed or in formation. The 80 days cycle. The October 26th high at 186.36 is only $1.32 away from the lower part of the target zone. But this target is still valid, since the market is still above his cycle lines. The next 80-day cycle low is expected on December 12th. The success rate is 57.14%. The 20-week cycle. The next peak for this cycle is expected around the second week of December. And the low should be around mid of February 2024. The target for the 20-week cycle is 194.06 and not 195.30. I want to apologize for this mistake. The success rate for the 20-week cycle is 100%. The 40-week cycle. When this 40-week cycle ends, this will be the end of the 18-month cycle. The success rate for the cycle is 100%. This week we have the confirmation of the last week crossing. The market crossed above his resistance cycle line at 181.96 for a potential upside target at 195.62. The cycle for next week is still up, but we can expect the 40-week cycle peak forming in the next few weeks. The 18-month cycle. The 18-month cycle is pointing downward. It's for this reason, the actual 40-week cycle won't be very bullish. The low for the 18-month cycle is scheduled for the end of January 29th or beginning of February. Let's switch to the Bitcoins. The 10-day cycle. On the last week update, the 10-day cycle low was expected on October 28th. The 10-day cycle low occurred on October 27th, one day early. The next one is expected on November 4th. The success rate for this cycle is 80%. I also mentioned, during the next correction, the Bitcoin should find support on his cycle line. That's what's exactly happened. Here are the support lines for next week and their potential targets if the market crossed below his cycle lines. The 20-day cycle. Last week, I said in my update, the next 20 days cycle is expected on October 29th. The low occurred on October 27th, 2 days early. The next one is scheduled for the November 13th. The Bitcoin should technically cross below his cycle line to provide a potential target. Here are the support lines for next week and their potential targets. The success rate for the 20 days cycle is 92.31%. The 40 days cycle. The last 40 days low occurred on October 11th and the next one is expected on November 15th. There is a very high probability the November 2nd high is the 40 days cycle peak. If it's the case, then the market should now start a correction. Here are the support lines for next week and their potential target if the market cross below. The success rate for the 40 days cycle is 72.73%. The 80 days cycle. The last 80 days cycle low was on September 11th. And the next one is scheduled on November 17th. The November peak at 35,919.84 is certainly the 80 days cycle peak. It should now start his correction to form the 80 days cycle low on November 17th. The success rate is 100%. The 20 weeks cycle. The last 20 weeks low occurred on September 11th, and the next one is expected January 13th, 2024. The success rate for this cycle is 75%. Otherwise, there is no difference with last week update. The 40 weeks cycle. There is nothing new from last week video. The low for this cycle is still expected around the first week of February. The success rate is 100%. The 18-month cycle. With the 35,919 high this week, the market meet and exceed his long-time target. This target has been triggered on March 23, 2023. When the market crossed above his cycle line at 24,150, giving a potential target at 32,700. This week high can be part of the 18-month cycle peak. The low for this 18-month cycle is expected in April 2024. The success rate for this cycle is 100%. In conclusion, for the Dow Jones, on the short term, we can expect a correction start very soon. On the longer term, the cycle should be bearish until the first quarter of 2024. The gold trend is still up in short term, but soon may turn down to form the 18-month cycle low by the end of January or February 2024. On the Bitcoins, like said last week, we can expect lots of volatility in the next few months. This is the end of this week video. Thank you for following me. Next week, I will publish another market update.